Chapter 8. The Ill Years. So autumn came, and all the hillsides were golden with the heather, and the red coral berries of the rowan trees hung from the boughs, and were wet with the spray of the waterfalls of the burns. And the days grew shorter, and winter came with snow, but Randal never came back to Fairnilee. Season after season passed, and year after year. Lady Ker's hair grew white like snow, and her face thin and pale, for she fasted often, as was a rule of her church. All this was before the Reformation, and she slept little, praying half the night for Randal's sake. And when she went on pilgrims to the many shrines of saints, to St. Boswell and to St. Rule's, hard by the great cathedral of St. Andrew's by the sea, nay, she would cross the border as far as Abbey of St. Albans, and even to St. Thomas's shrine of Canterbury, taking Jean with her. Many a weary mile they rode over hill and dale, and many an adventure they had, and ran many dangers from robbers and soldiers disbanded from the war. But at last they came back to Fairnilee, and a sad place it was, and silent without the sound of Randal's voice in the hall, or the noise of his hunting horn in the woods. And none of the people wore mourning for him, though they were mourning in their hearts. For to put on black they would look as they had given up all hope. Perhaps most of them thought they would never see him again, but Jeanie was not one who despaired. The years that had turned Lady Ker's hair white had made Jean a tall, slim lass, very bonny, everyone said. And the country people called her the flower of Tweed. The Yarrow folk had called her the flower of Yarrow, and why not the folk of Tweedside? It was now 6 years since Randal had been lost, and Jeanie was grown to a young woman about 17 years old. She had always kept up hope that Randal was with the Fairy Queen, and that he would return perhaps in the 7th year. People said on the countryside that many a man and woman had escaped out of Fairyland after 7 years' imprisonment there. Now the 6th year since Randal disappeared began very badly, and got worse as it went on. Just when spring should have come to the beginning at the end of February, there came the most dreadful snowstorm. It blew and it snowed, and it blew again, and snow was fine as dust on the road in summer. The strongest shepherds could not hold their own against the tempest, and were smothered from the waist. The flocks moved down from the hillsides, down and down, until all the sheep on the farm could be gathered together in a crowd, under the shelter of a wood in some deep dip of the hills. The storm seemed as if it would never cease. For 13 days the snow drifted and blew around. There was nothing for the sheep to eat, and if there had been hay enough, it would have been impossible to carry it to them. The poor beasts bit at the wool on each other's backs, and so many of them died that the shepherds built walls with the dead bodies to keep the wind and snow away from those that were left alive. There could be little work done on the farm that spring, and summer came in so cold and wet that the corn would not ripen, but leveled on the ground. Then autumn was rainy, and the green sheaves lay out in the fields, and sprouted and rotted, so that little corn was reaped, and little flour could be made that year. Then in winter, as when spring came, the people began to starve. They had no grain, they were out of potatoes in those days, no rice, nor could corn be brought in from other countries. So men and women and children might be seen in the fields with white pinched faces, gathering nettles to make soup, or digging for roots that were often little better than poison. They ground the bark of the fir trees, and mixed it with a little flour they could get, and they ate such beasts as never are eaten except in the time of famine. It is said that one very poor woman and her daughter always looked healthy and plump in those dreadful times, and people began to suspect them of being witches, and they were taken and charged before the sheriff with living by witchcraft, and they very likely would have been burned. So they confessed that they had fed ever since the famine began, on snails, but there were not snails enough for all the countryside, even if people had cared to eat them. So many men and women died, and more were weak and very ill. Lady Ker spent all her money in buying food for her people. Jean and she lived as little as they could, and were careful as they could be. They sold all the beautiful silver plate except the cup that Randall's father used to drink out of long ago. But almost everything else was sold to buy corn. So the weary year went on. At midsummer night came around, the seventh since the night when Randall was lost. Then Jean did what she had always meant to do. In the afternoon she slipped out of the house of Fairnilee, taking a little bread in a basket, and saying that she would go see the farmer's wife at Peel, which was on the other side of Tweed. But her mind was on the wishing well. There she would wish for Randall back again, to help his mother in the evil times. And if she, too, passed away, as he had passed out of sight and hearing, then she at least might be in the land that which she had been carried away to. How strange it seemed to Jean to be doing everything over again that she had done 7 years ago. Then she had been a little girl, and it had been hard for her to work to climb the side of the peel. Now she walked lightly and quickly, for she was tall and well grown. Soon she reached the crest of the hill, and remembered how she had sat down there and cried, and when she was a child, and how the flies had tormented her. They were buzzing and teasing still, for good times or bad make no difference to them as long as the sun shines. Then she reached the cairn at the top of the next hill, and far below her lay the forest. Deep within it ran the yarrow, glittering like silver. Jean paused for a few moments, then struck into a green path which led to the wood. The path wound beneath dark pines, and topmost branches were red in the evening light, but the shade was black beneath them. Soon the path reached a little grassy glade, where among the wet, cold grasses was the wishing well. It was almost hidden by the grass, and looked very black, cool, and deep. A tiny trickle of water flowed out of it, and flowed down to join the yarrow. The trees about it had scraps of rags and other things pinned to them, offerings made by the country people to the spirits of the well.